What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from this weekend's UFC 270 Gane versus Francis Ngannou event. We're going to be going into each of these fights in a lot of detail and taking a deep dive into these matchups from a betting perspective. If you like these videos and you'd like to watch breakdown videos for all the other fights on this card, head on over to my website. You'll find a link in the description below, MMABettingTips.com, where I post breakdown videos for every single fight on every UFC card. I think you're going to like it a lot. But remember, ultimately, this is not financial advice. This is not gambling advice. I'm not telling you what to do. Please remember to gamble responsibly. Do your own research before betting any of these fights. I am just a guy that sits in his pants watching fights all day for a living. Do your own research. It's very, very important. But with that being said, I have made a lot of money betting on MMA over the years, and the information I'm going to share with you in this video is backed up by 2 decades of experience. So I'm really hoping that you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions this weekend, maybe even earn some extra cash. So let's dive right into the very first fight on this main card, which is going to be Rodolfo Vieira against Wellington Turman. So we'll kick things off by taking a look at the odds on this one. We can see that Rodolfo Vieira is one of the biggest favourites on the card at average odds of about 1.44. Now what's very interesting to me about this fight is this is a very bad stylistic matchup for Wellington Turman for the reasons that I will describe in this breakdown. But despite this, you can see from the odds movement chart, the odds on Turman are actually declining and the odds on Vieira are actually improving, which means a lot of people must be betting Turman this week, which is very puzzling to me. I don't really understand it. I understand why you would not bet Vieira as a big favourite, but I don't understand why you take on a lot of risk by betting Turman in a matchup that he's extremely likely to lose. But anyway, we'll dig into this fight, talk about the reasons why I think it's dangerous to bet Turman this weekend and why it should be a very easy fight for Vieira. So Vieira is currently one of the biggest favourites on the card at average odds of about 1.44, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And if we take a look at the odds on Turman, he is currently around an average of 2.80, which is plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. But like we say, there's a bit of odds movement at the moment where Turman's odds are declining and Mr. Vieira's odds are improving. So Vieira is 32 years old, 6 foot tall with a 73-inch reach, and Turman is 25 years old, 6 foot tall with a 72-inch reach. So both these guys are roughly about the same size. Vieira is 7 years older than Turman, which would usually be an advantage for the younger fighter. This is obviously a young man's game. Being a lot younger than your opponent is usually an advantage. However, I don't think that's the case here, because even though Vieira is 7 years older than Wellington Turman, at 32 years old he's still in his prime and he's still very inexperienced in MMA. He's only at 9 pro fights, and every time we see Vieira he gets better and better. And so, you know, even though 7 years, or being 7 years younger, is usually a pretty big advantage, I actually think with, you know, Turman having, 22 pro fights, even though Turman's very young and he's likely to be improving a lot from fight to fight, especially with him training full-time with Glover Teixeira now, Vieira's probably going to be on, potentially an even steeper upward trajectory, because he's also training with, a really good team. And he's only had, less than half the number of fights that Turman has had. So, how do these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, obviously Rodolfo Vieira is a very, very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt that is trying to take that high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and apply it to MMA. So, he's very green as an MMA fighter, but an extremely high-level grappler. Wellington Turman does a little bit of everything. Not really a specialist, and as a result of that, he's not really great at anything in particular. He kind of mixes it up and looks to hold his own in all areas of MMA, which means, obviously, if this fight goes to the ground, with Vieira being such a specialist on the ground, he's going to have an enormous advantage over Wellington Turman on the ground, and things are likely to get pretty ugly for Turman. We'll talk about grappling in a minute. We'll start off with striking, because with Vieira, being, from a traditional grappling background, you could be forgiven for thinking that Turman could perhaps have the advantage striking in this fight, but I'm not convinced he will. Like, I can't say for sure whether, Vieira is going to have the advantage standing up in this fight, but it's definitely possible. What I see from Vieira is a guy that is making big improvements from fight to fight. And in his last matchup against Dustin Stolfus, he looked very comfortable standing. He moved very well. He did a really good job of reading Stolfus. When Stolfus would come forward and attack him, he did a really good job of reading him and backing up and slipping the shots and sticking behind that high boxing guard. Vieira didn't do a lot offensively, but defensively, I was very, very impressed with him against Stolfus, which just suggests that he is gradually becoming a much more complete fighter. And while Vieira didn't do a lot offensively against Stolfus, the fact that he really didn't take much damage in that fight, did a good job of defending himself, and held his own standing, is quite impressive, really, considering this was only his 9th pro fight. When you look at Wellington Turman, he's going to be a lot better than Vieira offensively because he's been striking for a lot longer. He's got that confidence to come forward and attack his opponents. But Turman's biggest weakness is his striking defense. He just doesn't really see the shots coming, doesn't move his head very much, and as a result gets rocked, dropped, wobbled a lot in his fights. And so this is one of those matchups where neither of these guys is particularly great standing. Turman's very bad defensively. Vieira isn't great offensively. But the fact that Vieira, is a big, strong, powerful Brazilian, who's quite difficult to hit until you get him tired, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But because Vieira's quite difficult to hit and Turman's very easy to hit, if these two guys actually exchange, which they're bound to, right? Turman's an aggressive guy that likes to come forward and bait his opponent into exchanging. When these two guys start to exchange, because Vieira's a big, old, powerful Brazilian and he's a lot better than Turman defensively, I could actually see Vieira having a lot of success in the stand-up exchanges here. And, we've also got to take into consideration the fact that we haven't seen him since July. Vieira appears to be making exponential improvements from fight to fight. His striking defense looked a lot better against Stolfus than it has in the past. So maybe now against Turman, his striking offense is going to look a hell of a lot better than it did before. So purely based on defense, I do slightly lean towards Vieira here. I think he might have a slight edge. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I wouldn't be so sure that Turman's going to have it all his own way if it stays standing based on that Stolfus performance. But the real challenge for Turman in this fight is going to be on the ground, because his takedown defense isn't particularly good. His ground game is at a very low level, and he's very, very weak off his back. And one of the things that has impressed me the most about Rodolfo Vieira throughout his UFC career is that his offensive wrestling is actually brilliant. What we see from a lot of these very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners is that when they first come into MMA, they don't have the offensive wrestling to make the most of their high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They struggle to get their opponents down. We're kind of seeing Mackenzie Dern go through this struggle at the moment. But Rodolfo Vieira, after just 9 pro fights, has really, really good offensive wrestling. His timing on those deep double legs is absolutely phenomenal. And when he shoots in on your legs, you'd better have real good takedown defense, because if you don't, it's extremely difficult to stop this guy from taking you down. And then on the ground, we've seen, he's got a crushing top game, very, very dangerous submissions. And he's just an absolute nightmare on the ground. It's a death sentence for most guys if you do go to the ground with him. And with Turman being quite easy to take down, quite easy to hold down, weak off his back, doesn't have the best submission defense, if Vieira does get this fight to the ground, it's going to be trouble for Turman. So he's spoken a lot about how this is a very difficult matchup for Turman, and how Vieira is likely to have a slight advantage standing up, but a gigantic advantage on the ground. But that's oversimplifying the complexities of this matchup, and there are ways in which Turman can cause Rodolfo Vieira big problems, and which I guess is the rationale behind, a good number of people that are obviously betting Turman, with Turman's odds declining in the run-up to this fight. The massive issue that Vieira's had in his career so far has been his gas tank, right? This guy gasses extremely quickly. And Vieira's kind of cursed in many ways, because we see this with, a good number of grapplers where, even though grappling might be their strength, the more they grapple, the faster they get tired, and therefore they have to use their grappling sparingly. Vieira definitely has this issue where when he grapples, he's a nightmare. He's devastating. He's very good at taking you down, and he can tie you up in knots in the ground, put you in some really bad positions, and, you know, it's very difficult to survive on the ground with this guy. He's very, very good, but that comes at a cost, and the more he grapples, the more tired he gets. So he's got to now pick his spots for when he grapples, because he knows he doesn't have the gas tank to grapple hard for 15 minutes. And so Rodolfo Vieira is very inexperienced in MMA. He's only had 9 pro fights, and we're seeing him grow and improve from fight to fight. And as well as seeing his striking improve, what we're also seeing is a greater awareness of pacing and greater strategy and game planning in his approach to MMA. So an example of this would be pretty much all of his fights leading into the Dustin Stolfus matchup. Rodolfo Vieira's game plan and strategy right up until he fought Stolfus was to come out hard in round 1, shoot a nice deep double leg, drag his opponent to the ground, and do terrible things to him on the ground until he was able to obtain a finish. That was basically Rodolfo Vieira's style of fighting in a nutshell. But then he fought Anthony Hernandez, and this kind of blew up in his face because he kept taking Hernandez down, but Hernandez was able to weather the storm. And Vieira exerted so much energy with his grappling in that first round that he just faded very, very hard, and he couldn't defend himself when Hernandez, went to attack him. And, in the second round, well, he actually gassed in the first round, but in the second round, Hernandez eventually made him pay for gassing out, and Hernandez was able to get the finish, right? A big part of Vieira gassing out in that fight was to do with Anthony Hernandez. Hernandez did a really good job of not giving Vieira any breaks in that matchup. Any time Vieira stopped trying to grapple Hernandez, Hernandez smothered him in pressure. He was all over him. He was walking him down standing. He was trying to take Vieira down. He was forcing crazy scrambles on the ground. There were no breaks for Vieira in this fight, which is one of the reasons why he did gas out so fast. But at the same time, Rodolfo Vieira did not fight with an efficient style. He spammed takedowns, committed way too much energy to his grappling in round 1, and burnt himself out. What we saw from Vieira in his most recent fight against Stolfus was completely different, right? We barely saw any grappling from Vieira in rounds 1 and 2, which is very notable to me because he usually starts his fights with a lot of grappling. And then he waited until round 3 to use his grappling. He conserved loads of energy in round 1 and 2, where he really didn't exert too much energy, didn't engage with Stolfus too much in the first and second round, which meant in round 3 he had the energy to commit, big energy to the takedown, got Stolfus down, submitted him very, very early in round 3. So he kind of flipped his strategy on his head, whereas, leading into the Stolfus fight, he would come out very hard in round 1, drag his opponents to the ground and look to get a finish. When he gassed against Hernandez, he realised, okay, this isn't smart, because if I burn myself out in round 1, I've got to fight another 10 minutes in rounds 2 and 3. And if I'm, too tired to defend myself, this isn't going to work out if my opponent survived round 1. Then he flipped the strategy on his head, came in with a different game plan, different strategy, different pacing against Stolfus, and decided to finish strong instead, which was really smart. Now, that worked great against Stolfus, but where it could get dicey for Vieira is what happens when he fights someone that won't let him compete at a comfortable pace in rounds 1 and 2. So Vieira's strategy and game plan worked great against Stolfus because Stolfus couldn't make Vieira work hard enough in rounds 1 and 2 to burn him out. But if Vieira was fighting someone like Anthony Hernandez, you would have seen the same outcome, because Hernandez would have still pushed that crazy pace in rounds 1 and 2. He would have either forced Vieira to exert a lot of energy striking to try and back Hernandez up, or go to his grappling earlier than he wanted to alleviate the pressure that Hernandez was putting on him, and it would have been the same outcome, right? The only difference between the Hernandez fight and the Stolfus fight is that, Vieira didn't exert a lot of energy in round 1 with his grappling. Stolfus didn't make him exert a lot of energy in round 1 or 2. Stolfus kind of let him off the hook. He kind of played into Vieira's hands and played Vieira's game, which made life very, very easy for Vieira. That's where the opportunity for Wellington Turman comes in this matchup, because Turman's a young, hungry, aggressive bull that we know will like to come forward, put a lot of pressure on Vieira, force him to engage, and Vieira's going to have to do something about that. If Turman really pushes a pace here and forces Vieira to work, Vieira's got a difficult decision to make. He is going to have to either use his grappling to alleviate that pressure or get into a firefight with Turman, and whichever option he chooses to try and alleviate that pressure, Vieira's probably not going to be fighting at the comfortable pace he wants to. He's going to be exerting, maybe more energy than he's comfortable exerting, because what the Stolfus performance says to me is that Vieira isn't confident in his gas tank at all, and so he's going to hold back as long as possible, and he's only going to commit a lot of energy in a fight when he's either forced to, because his opponent is pressuring him and forcing him to, or very late on in a matchup where he can see the finish line, there's not too long left in the fight, and he's like, okay, I can go now, really go for this, and if worst comes to worst, I do burn myself out, I'll be saved by the bell, because it's very close to the end of the fight anyway. So this is a very interesting matchup, because there's no doubt that Vieira should be a big favourite here. Ultimately, he's got a gigantic advantage on the ground over Turman. Turman's going to be in a lot of trouble if this fight goes to the ground. It's difficult for me to see Turman surviving. If this fight goes to the ground, the skill gap is too big. Also, with the improvements Vieira's making to his striking and how bad Turman is defensively, I see Vieira doing pretty well standing up. But it's very dangerous to bet on a guy like Vieira as a big favourite, because if at any time in this fight it gets crazy, like if fucking Vieira knocks Turman down and they get into a crazy scramble, but Vieira can't finish Turman survives, and then it's into the second round all of a sudden, Vieira is the exact kind of guy that's going to adrenaline dump. And I really dislike betting guys at big favourite odds that don't have the gas tank to fight to their full potential for 15 minutes. That Vieira's gas tank, in the nicest way possible, is made of glass, and if at any point this guy is taken out of his game plan and forced to exert more energy than he plans on exerting, he's going to gas bad and find himself in a lot of trouble. So it's a complicated fight, because from a technical point of view, skill for skill, Vieira should absolutely dominate this matchup, there's no question, but his gas tank is a huge red flag, which makes me not want to take him at big favourite odds. So then you flip to the other side, do we bet Turman? Well, that's very difficult for me as well, because I don't want to bet on a guy who's probably going to be in a lot of trouble and probably going to lose wherever it takes place. Can Turman win? He can absolutely win, but it's not going to be easy for him. And with Vieira improving from fight to fight, with Turman being bad defensively, standing up and on the ground, this is just not a fight I'm that interested in betting. I love money too much. I'm too much of a fan of money to put my cash in danger betting a matchup like this. So I'm not going to be betting this one. But I hope you found the information in this video useful, and let me know in the comments below, if you disagree, if you think I've missed anything, let me know what you think. So we now move into the next fight, which is going to be Cody Stamen against Syed Nurmagomedov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that again, Nurmagomedov, another pretty big favourite. He's currently the favourite at average odds of about 1.53, which is minus 189 for an implied probability of 65%. And if we take a look at the odds on Cody Stamen currently around about a 2.65 underdog, which is plus 165 for an implied probability of 38%. So very, very interesting fight this, and another scary looking Dagestani guy coming into the UFC to fight after what has been a UFC career that's been disrupted quite a lot. Nurmagomedov has been quite inactive over the last few years since he first made his debut all the way back in 2018, which is almost 4 years ago now. We've only seen him fight 4 times since then. 2 of those fights have ended very quickly, which means we don't have tons of information, we don't have tons of footage on where Nurmagomedov is currently at this stage in his career. And so this fight is a difficult one to break down, because we're going to have to make some assumptions about Nurmagomedov's skill set that we can't back up with fight footage, because it just doesn't exist. There's not enough fight footage on him recently. But either way, I hope you find this breakdown video useful. And I think, for me, I'm just hoping that with how inactive Nurmagomedov has been over the last few years, I'm just hoping that this fight does go the distance this weekend and we get a really good look at Nurmagomedov, so that when he fights in the future, we've got a lot more information on him that we can use then to hopefully make some money on his future fights. But anyway, let's take a look at the tail of the tape. So Cody Stamen is 32 years old, 5'6" with a 64.5-inch reach, and Syed Nurmagomedov is 29 years old, 5'8", with a 70-inch reach. So that's the first kind of X factor that we've got to delve into in this one. And obviously Syed Nurmagomedov has got a pretty nice size and reach advantage here over Stamen. 5-inch reach advantage, a little bit taller as well. And this is very, very significant in the context of this matchup. We'll be talking a lot about the way reach can impact the striking and grappling in this fight as we go on throughout the breakdown. But nice size and reach advantage there for Nurmagomedov. There's also another X factor in this fight that I want to talk about. That's a little bit anecdotal. It's just based on my experience, and there will be outliers to what I'm about to say. But when you look at both these guys, I question whether they're kind of heading in opposite career trajectories. I could be completely wrong, but when you look at, let's start with Syed Nurmagomedov, right? When you look at Syed Nurmagomedov, here he is with Zaruk Adashev, and Mark Henry. If you scroll through, Nurmagomedov's Instagram profile, you can see that for a very long time, he's been training with absolute monsters, out in New York. You scroll through his profile, you can see here he is with, Frankie Edgar. There he is with Mark Henry. You don't have to scroll for very far to see him, with Zabit Magomed Sharapov. Here he is, a picture with him, training at Tiger Muay Thai, with a bunch of monsters. There he is, picture with Timur Valiev. There he is with Corey Anderson. There's a picture of him with Zabit and Nick Catone. So for a very, very long time now, Syed Nurmagomedov has been training with an absolute shark tank, right? Some of the best fighters in the world, with some of the best coaches in the world, Nick Catone and Mark Henry. And so even though we haven't seen that much from Syed Nurmagomedov over the last few years, he's been very, very inactive over the last 4 years, it's reasonable for us to assume that he is going to be improving a lot. He's only 29 years old, and the last time we really got a good look at him was back in 2019 against Barcelos, and a lot can change in that period of time. So with the guys he's training with, even though we haven't seen improvements from him, I would bet, I'm a betting man, if I had to bet with my cash, I would bet that the version of Nurmagomedov we get this weekend is going to look a lot better than the version of Nurmagomedov we've ever seen in the past. Right? Could be wrong, but as a general rule, I think it's fair to say that's likely. Now, when you look at Cody Stamen, he never trained at a particularly good gym with particularly good training partners, right? He's been at he's been at Michigan top team for pretty much his entire career, but he did something, in his last couple of fights, which I don't like. It's almost always a red flag when a fighter does this, and you will always find exceptions to the rule, but as a general rule, when a fighter moves to Las Vegas to train, usually they regress. There will be exceptions to the rule. There'll be people in the comments who'll be like, what about this guy? What about that guy? There will always be exceptions to every rule. But as a general rule, when a fighter moves to Vegas to train, they usually regress. And Cody Stamen has moved to Vegas to train, right? He's doing a lot of training at Extreme Couture at the moment. You can see the 10th Planet Las Vegas branding in the background. And it's just not a good move, generally speaking. Pay attention to it. Keep track of that trend for yourself. And you'll notice when fighters move to Vegas to train, usually red flag city. And so, when you look at Syed Nurmagomedov, he's in the gym every day with absolute monsters. And while Stamen's in the gym with absolute monsters as well, Extreme Couture has a lot of good fighters and a lot of good fighters passing through. I don't know, man. I just think you're more likely to have seen Stamen at 32 years old after 23 fights reach his full potential, and it's unlikely we're going to see him get any better from here on out. Whereas Nurmagomedov, you'd expect him to get exponentially better from fight to fight. So, when you look at how both these guys match up from a stylistic point of view, the surname Nurmagomedov and this guy's appearance may mislead you into what to expect from this fight, because we know Cody Stamen is a strong grappler, and you would be expecting Nurmagomedov to be a pretty strong grappler as well, but that's not the case, at least from what I've seen. I'm not saying Nurmagomedov isn't a strong grappler, but there isn't that much recent footage available on his grappling, so his grappling's pretty much an unknown coming into this fight. We've seen a little bit of grappling from him late on in the Rony Barcelos fight. His takedown offense looked pretty bad. He did look pretty weak off his back, which again is going to, not be what you'd expect to hear for a guy with this appearance and the surname Nurmagomedov. But when you look at Nurmagomedov, it's very clear to me from his past fights that his base is in striking. He has like a sideways kind of karate stance. Likes to chip away at his opponents with a lot of long range-finding kicks. He's not the best boxer. He is pretty good defensively. It's difficult to get to him. And he does have, pretty low-level boxing, actually, because he throws a lot of, goofy spinning back fists and stuff when he gets pressured, which is usually a sign of inexperience, a sign that he doesn't really know what to do with a boxing combination, so he just kind of closes his eyes, throws a spin attack, and hopes that he backs his opponent up. But I'm sure Mark Henry's working on that, and I'm sure that's something that you'll see beaten out of him the more time he spends with a coach like Mark Henry. And so, even though this guy's from Dagestan, he's got the surname Nurmagomedov, this is actually a striker versus grappler matchup where Stamen is the grappler, Nurmagomedov is the striker. And if this fight stays standing, there's no doubt that Nurmagomedov has got a pretty big advantage over Stamen. It is helped by the 5-inch reach advantage. Nurmagomedov likes to fight very long anyway and uses length to chip away at his opponents from a safe distance. But when you look at Cody Stamen, he's one of these guys that doesn't like to engage standing. Cody Stamen tends to slow down and become less effective as fights wear on, and so Stamen's style of striking, I guess, is quite similar to Rodolfo Vieira's, where he likes to avoid engaging on the feet. He likes to avoid engaging in striking, so that when he does choose to grapple, he's got a lot more energy to fully commit to that grappling. And so you're not ever really going to see Stamen try to win a stand-up fight or try to get the better of striking exchanges. That's just a bonus if it happens. Stamen's going to be more than happy to let Nurmagomedov win the stand-up exchanges and dictate the fight standing, because that's not the battle that Stamen's going to try and win. Stamen's obviously going to try and steal rounds with takedowns and control. And that's why this is a pretty difficult fight for Stamen, because even though we haven't seen a lot of Syed Nurmagomedov's grappling, with the team that he's training with, you'd assume it's pretty fucking good. And again, it's an assumption, but no disrespect to Stamen. Stamen is a very good offensive wrestler, a pretty good MMA grappler. But Nurmagomedov, for the last few years, has been in the gym every day with the likes of Frankie Edgar, Zabit Magomed Sharapov. Think about all the other excellent MMA grapplers that have passed through that team over the years. The Eddie Alvarez's, the Marlon Moraes. He trains every day with Timur Valiev, Zaruk Adashev, all these strong grapplers. And so, what is Cody Stamen going to be able to do to Nurmagomedov with his very meat and potatoes style of MMA wrestling that Nurmagomedov hasn't experienced 1,000 times in the gym before? And so, even though we haven't seen a lot of Nurmagomedov's takedown defense and ground game, I'm assuming it's pretty good. One of the issues with Cody Stamen is that he is quite small in terms of his wingspan, right? He's unfortunately got quite short arms, and he's got that small, compact, muscular Team Alpha Male style frame, which lends itself very well to taking opponents down, because he's very athletic, he's very fast, he's very explosive. when he shoots in on his opponents and tries to take him down, his double leg takedown entries are very well timed, and that's difficult to deal with. But because Stamen's wingspan is quite small, he's not the most physically imposing grappler. And so he's very good at getting his opponents down, but his grappling control's not great. He's not very good at holding them down. And so this is a very difficult stylistic matchup for Stamen, because Nurmagomedov is going to have the advantage on the feet. There's no doubt about that. And while Stamen is a very, very good MMA grappler, I don't think he's big enough, strong enough, physically imposing enough to hold a guy like Nurmagomedov down and control him on the ground for long enough to win a decision here, because it's very unlikely he's going to finish Nurmagomedov. Now, the issue with everything that I've just said is that I'm making big assumptions, because there isn't barely any footage available on Nurmagomedov's takedown offense and ground game. But what I know about Stamen's grappling, Stamen's style of offensive wrestling, Stamen's style of grappling control, and what we know about Nurmagomedov's background and who he trains with on a daily basis, I think it's fair to assume he's going to be difficult to control on the ground, because he's going to scramble like crazy if he does get taken down, and his size advantage will make it difficult for Stamen to hold him down and rack up a lot of control. But we don't know for sure, because the footage doesn't exist to prove it. So making money from betting on MMA is all about trying to make the best decision possible with the information we've got available, and quite often we're dealing with big gaps in information. And that's okay. Sometimes when we've got big gaps in information, you can still find a good risk to reward ratio in the odds to pull the trigger and place a bet. But I don't think that's one of those instances here. When you look at Cody Stamen and we take a look at his odds, he's currently around about a 2.65 underdog, right? Plus 165. I have zero interest in betting a guy like this, because I know he's given up a size and reach advantage against a guy who's going to be able to use that size and reach advantage both standing up and on the ground. It's possible that Stamen may be able to use his grappling here to take Nurmagomedov down and wet blanket him, but at an implied probability of almost 40%, I just don't feel I'm getting a good risk to reward ratio in betting Stamen, based on the fact I expect Nurmagomedov to be pretty difficult to take down and hold down. While I don't know for sure, it's reasonable to assume he will be. On the flip side, if you look at the odds on Nurmagomedov, 1.53 minus 189 for an implied probability of 65%. I've got no interest in betting this guy either, because if his takedown offense and ground game isn't as good as I think it will be, Stamen could quite easily take this guy down and dominate him on the ground. So there'll be a group of people that will, based on what I've just said, rush into betting Stamen, because, he's an underdog, and it's possible, that he can kind of take Nurmagomedov down and wet blanket him. But from my perspective, there's too big of a question mark, because we don't know for sure if his takedown offense and ground game is good. It could be, it couldn't be, it might be, it might not be. When you get into placing bets, in situations like that, all you're doing is gambling. You may as well go play craps. You may as well go play roulette, red or black. Fucking guess on what fucking colour the ball's going to land on, right? Stamen is an underdog, but at an implied probability of 40%, I just don't think, there's a big enough payout for me to warrant taking a risk on him. So this one's not for me, but hopefully you found that breakdown useful, and hopefully that helps you make a decision on how you're going to approach betting this fight, or if you're going to pass on it. So now we're going to get into the third fight on the main card. Andre Filho making his UFC debut against Michel Pereira, and I hope I pronounced that right. Michel always feels a little bit weird calling a man by a girl's name, so I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sure I'm not, but anyway, Pereira against Filho. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Pereira, one of the biggest favourites on the card, at average odds of about 1.36, which is minus 278 for an implied probability of 74%. And if we take a look at the odds on Filho, he is currently around an average of, call it 3.35, which is plus 235 for an implied probability of 30%. So Pereira, very big favourite in this matchup. Filio, obviously making his UFC debut, coming in on about 2 or 3 weeks notice for this fight, and getting an opportunity to burst into the UFC on the main card of a huge pay-per-view. So big opportunity for Filio this week, and I would expect him to try and grab it with both hands. He does train at Sanford MMA, so you can expect him to be pretty well trained, well prepared for this fight. Sanford MMA, one of the best MMA gyms in the world, and I'm sure Filio is going to be very well prepared for the threats that Pereira is going to bring to the table. So Filio, 27 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach, and Pereira, 28 years old, 6'1" with a 73-inch reach. So both guys roughly about the same size, roughly about the same age as well. No notable X factors there. I think probably the only notable X factor on this one is that, of course, Filio coming in on pretty short notice. So there are a lot of debutants on this card, and one of the issues a lot of the time when you're researching a debutant is there's not always like the best quality footage to be able to form a strong opinion, and that's definitely the case with Filio. If we look at Filio's last few fights, a lot of them have ended very quickly, and the last time we got a chance to really take a good look at him was his fight back in 2020 against Antonio Dos Santos, in a fight that went the distance. Watching that fight is very useful because we see a little bit of striking and a little bit of grappling from Filio, but at the same time there's not tons of super recent footage on Filio, which does make it a little bit tricky to know what to expect from him this weekend. So everything that I talk to you about in this breakdown video, it's going to be based on what I've seen in his recent fights, but just know is not super reliable because he's faced a relatively low level of opponent in fights that have ended pretty quickly. And with him training at Sanford MMA full time, he's likely to be improving a lot from fight to fight. And the thing with Filio is we've seen very different styles to him in just the last sort of 2 years. If you go back and watch all of his fights from over the last 2 years, he performs really differently actually in many of the fights, which makes it very difficult to know what to expect from him. For example, if you go back and watch his last fight against Stefan Sekelic, he comes out with almost like a Conor McGregor style where he takes control of the centre of the octagon, he puts Sekelic on the back foot, he moves very well, he measures distance off the jab, and he's very, very aggressive. Straight away he takes the fight to Sekelic, overwhelms him with pressure, and gets the knockout very early. And when I watched that fight, I was like, okay, this guy looks pretty good. But then when you go and watch his performances against like James Vick and Antonio Dos Santos, he's nothing like that. He stands in the middle of the octagon, quite flat-footed, throws a really low volume of strikes, doesn't look particularly dangerous, looks very flat, and completely unimpressive, if I'm being honest with you. So what's tricky about researching this matchup is I don't know whether how good Filio looked against Sekelic compared to his fights against Vick and Dos Santos were him improving with him now being at Sanford MMA, or just a different game plan and strategy he utilised on the night for Sekelic, and if that was kind of like a one-off. And that complicates things a lot actually, because the way that you beat Michel Pereira is by pressuring him. We know that what Pereira wants to do is circle on the outside, bounce around on the outside, and use his length and his unorthodox style of striking to kind of chip away at you. That's what Pereira wants to do, and the way that you beat Pereira is by taking control of the centre of the octagon, walking him down, doing a pretty good job of cutting the cage off and smothering this guy in pressure, so that, similar to what we were talking about earlier on with Rodolfo Vieira, there's no breaks for Pereira. You stay on him and you don't give him time to breathe. What's interesting about that is that is the exact style that Filio used against Stefan Sekelic. And so if Filio comes in with that style against Pereira, he's likely to do pretty well. The problem is that's the only time we've seen Filio do that, and the fight ended in just 2 minutes. So it's very difficult to know what to expect from him this weekend. Because if he shows up and performs like he did against James Vick and Antonio Dos Santos, where he just stood in the middle of the octagon, through a very low volume of strikes, didn't really do a lot, it's going to be a cakewalk for Pereira, because Pereira's probably going to be able to dance around him, and chip away at him all night. So this one is a very, very difficult one to form a strong opinion on, because we don't know what version of Filio we're going to get, and we don't have enough recent footage to, be reasonably confident in what version of Filio that we're going to get. But when you're dealing with Pereira, we know that he's very elusive, he's very difficult to hit, he's very unorthodox, he's very difficult to read. You never know what he's going to do next, and that's not easy to deal with for, a young, inexperienced fighter like Filio. So, needless to say, sorry to be boring, I wouldn't recommend betting this fight because we don't really know how Filio's going to look in there. What I can say is if Filio looks like he did, like I say, performs like he did against Vic and Dos Santos, probably going to struggle pretty bad here. But the Sekulic fight did contain some clues which suggest that he may be able to cause Pereira some trouble. So I hope you found that useful. And let's move on to one of the more interesting fights on this card, which is going to be the co-main event between Brandon Moreno and Davison Figuerado. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Brandon Moreno is currently a favourite at average odds of 1.57, which is minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. And if we take a look at the odds on Davison Figueiredo, he is currently around about an average of 2.45, which is going to be plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. So in the eyes of the bookies, this fight is roughly 60-40, which I completely disagree with, and I think it's kind of crazy. I am very surprised that Brandon Moreno is still at pretty playable odds, to be honest with you. I assumed Moreno would be a much bigger favourite than this. If we take a look at my bets, when Davison Figueiredo and Moreno, fought in the rematch, I bet Brandon Moreno. As you can see here, we bet on Brandon Moreno at nice big underdog odds. And so, in this third fight, why would I do anything different, right? We bet on Moreno, big underdog odds against Davison Figueiredo. He came through for us in a big way. The fight was a lot easier for him than I thought it would be. But ultimately, he dominated, and I don't see why this fight would be any different. Like I say, I'm very surprised that Moreno isn't a bigger favourite than this one. But let's look at some of the X factors on this one, and then we'll dive into how both these guys match up from a stylistic point of view, and why I will be betting Moreno this weekend, and why I think he's a pretty good bet. So Moreno, 28 years old, 5'7" with a 70-inch reach, and Davison Figueiredo, 34 years old, 5'5" with a 68-inch reach. So this is the first X factor that we need to discuss. Davison Figueiredo is very, very old for a flyweight. The younger weight classes, the lighter weight classes, they tend to be all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism. Obviously, the older you get, those are some of the first things that go. You lose your speed, you lose your reflexes, you're not athletic as you get older. But Davison Figueiredo, he's been able to forge a very good career in the flyweight division from having abnormal power for a flyweight, right? He knocks people flying 12 feet across the octagon. We saw the Joseph Benavidez fights, right? It was ridiculous. Every time Figueiredo touched Benavidez would go down. So Figueiredo is a bit of an outlier in that he has abnormally crazy power in a division where true legit one-shot KO power is very rare, right? The best flyweights, you think of like a Demetrius Johnson, they have relied on speed and reflexes and athleticism over the years. So Figueiredo brought something very different to the table, and for a very long time had a lot of success with it. But Figueiredo's style was always the same. He would come forward, look to put his opponent on the back foot, look to put his opponent into a defensive shell, and he would load up, land big power strikes on them, and hope that they respect his power enough to not make him work very hard and not really push him and not really test that gas tank. And anytime we saw guys be able to deal with his power, anytime we saw guys that didn't respect his power and weren't intimidated by his power, and they kind of stood up to him and took the fight to Figueredo, that's historically when we've seen him struggle. And Brandon Moreno is a tough Mexican with that, legendary Mexican chin. A lot of Mexican fighters have extremely good chins. Moreno is no different. And now, in 2 fights, we've seen Moreno stand right in front of Figueredo, go toe-to-toe, take Figueredo's best shots. And we've seen that it doesn't appear Figueredo can hurt Moreno, to the point where we've seen Moreno eat big, hard, clean power punches from Figueredo. He's eaten bombs, and it hasn't fazed him at all. It hasn't hurt him. And for that reason, it is very difficult for me to see what Figueredo could do differently to win this fight. I'm not saying it can't happen. Anything can happen in MMA. Figueredo could come out, land a bomb, knock Moreno out in 10 seconds. But ultimately, Figueredo's getting older. He's going to be declining from fight to fight. If you look at Moreno, he's only 28 years old. Moreno's going to be getting better and better from fight to fight. Both these guys are on very opposite career trajectories. 34 years old is pretty old for a flyweight. It's very unlikely that Figueredo is going to be able to beat Moreno in this one when he's already struggled quite badly against him twice. And so, let's unpack this whole thing. Let's go through it in terms of striking, grappling, X factors, and let's also talk a little bit about their other 2 fights so you can understand more why I feel Moreno is a very solid bet here. And like I say, doesn't mean Moreno will win. Good bets don't always win, bad bets don't always lose. But based on everything we know going into this fight, Moreno's a phenomenal bet at the current odds. I absolutely love this bet. So, where do we begin? Let's start off by taking a look at this picture, because we've already mentioned how Figueredo is getting older and how he's unlikely to be getting any better, from fight to fight. If anything, he's likely to be declining at this stage in his career. And we've spoken about how Figueredo is getting old for a flyweight, right? And we know that one of the biggest issues throughout Figueredo's career is that he has to absolutely kill himself to make the flyweight limit, of 125 pounds. And this has been, something that has plagued him even in these title fights, right? And he's cited the difficult weight cut as one of the reasons why he has struggled so badly against Moreno in his fights so far. And this picture here shows him absolutely shredded. It was posted 5 days ago. Absolutely shredded, looking much leaner than we've ever seen from him before. And this is indicating that he's obviously, trying to correct his weight cutting issues and trying to come into this fight in much better shape, so that, putting himself through that brutal weight cut just 24 hours before he's scheduled to fight for a world title, by making that better preparation, he's going to be able to perform much closer to his full potential for longer in the actual title fight. And so this picture indicates to me that Figueredo's taking this fight extremely seriously. He could show up on Saturday night looking better than ever, put it on Moreno for 5 rounds, win dominantly, get his title back, and prove us all wrong. This picture needs to be taken seriously, because it's very, very serious. It's very, very clear Figueredo's coming into this fight. And he's made a lot of changes compared to the previous 2 times that he's fought Moreno. So I'm looking forward to seeing what version of Figueredo we get this weekend. Having said that, it doesn't get easier to make weight as you get older, right? As you get older, it becomes harder to make weight. And so even though the changes that Figueredo's made in training camp in the lead up to this fight, as we see in this picture, may help that weight cut to go smoother than it would have done otherwise, how much is he depleting his body on a daily basis in training camp to maintain this kind of weight, right? And how much will that take out of his training and preparation in the run up to this matchup? And, how much will that take out of his, his power and his explosiveness on fight night? You know, is he powerful and explosive when he fights because he's a big dude that cuts a lot of weight and then blows right back up to being a big dude again? You know, if this is how he's walking around now, is he going to be as powerful and as explosive as he was before? And if he isn't, is he going to be able to compete with Moreno from a technical point of view? Because what we've seen in the past fights is Moreno is certainly a better grappler than Figueiredo, and it's very unlikely that Figueiredo is going to match Moreno's volume. So if this guy, you know, is walking around you know, a lot lighter, without as much, you know, explosive, fast twitch muscle fiber, where he's going to be able to deliver those crazy killer power strikes, you know, does that make him a lot less dangerous? Does that make this an even easier fight for Moreno? The truth is we don't know, but what we do know is that Figueiredo, you know, he's trying to make adjustments and changes coming into this matchup, and we need to take that seriously. So, in terms of how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view when it comes to striking, we are blessed by having the best piece of information ever to make this judgment, because we've already seen these two guys fight twice before, right? And what we saw in those fights was, you know, exactly what you'd expect, exactly what I've mentioned. A lot of volume from Moreno and big, powerful single shots from Figueiredo. And where this fight gets difficult for Figueiredo is that he doesn't appear to be able to hurt Moreno with power. The big difference between the first fight and the second fight, and the reason why the second fight was very dominant for Moreno, was because if you go back and watch their first fight, you can see that early on, Moreno showed Figueiredo a lot of respect. You've got to remember that Moreno fought Figueiredo immediately after Figueiredo had those fights with Benavidez, where every time he touched Benavidez was going down, right? So Figueiredo had this aura about him coming into the Moreno fight, where he was this crazy knockout artist. And you could see early on in their first fight, Moreno showed Figueiredo a lot of respect. He started very slow. He was very reluctant to get into exchanges with Figueiredo, and it was a very, very slow-paced start to that fight, which benefited Figueiredo, because Figueiredo does have a tendency to slow down as fights wear on. So that enabled Figueiredo to kind of manage his output and cardio and perform better over 5 rounds. But, you know, into the second and third round of that fight, when Moreno started to feel Figueiredo's power and started to eat some big shots, you could see that he stopped respecting Figueiredo as much. He started to realise that this guy hits hard, but I can take this guy's shots. And then you started to see Moreno increase the volume, force Figueiredo to exchange more, and then he started to take over in that second and third round. The difference with the second fight, and the reason why he was so dominant, was because Moreno had already felt Figueiredo's power in the first matchup, already knew Figueiredo didn't have the power to hurt him, and so in that second fight in the first round, Moreno come out the gate super hard, showed him no respect, forced him to exchange early, put a pace on him that was unsustainable for Fig, and just broke him down, wore him down, and finished him in round 3. I struggle to see what would be any different, you know, in this third fight, unless, like I say, Figueiredo comes in and looks completely different than how we've ever seen from him before, or he's able to catch Moreno with a big shot early. I really don't see what would be different about this one. And what makes this fight extra difficult for Figueiredo is that Moreno has also shown that he has a huge advantage over Figueiredo on the ground. Figueiredo's takedown offense isn't great. He's quite weak off his back. And anytime we saw Moreno, you know, really commit hard to a takedown, he was able to get it. And Fig didn't do a particularly good job of working his way back up to his feet. Another huge issue with Figueiredo is that when you make him grapple, he tends to gas very quickly. We were talking earlier on about how Rodolfo Vieira is in a very tricky position, because the more he grapples, the faster he gets tired, and Figueiredo has exactly the same problem. This is a major issue in this matchup, because Moreno's a tough Mexican. He's the kind of guy that you're literally going to have to shut off in order to beat. You have to turn his lights off. You're going to need to land that one-shot KO, that kill shot, to put him away. And that's very difficult to do. If Figueiredo were to land a bomb on Moreno, he's got to put him away. Because if he doesn't, if at any time in this fight Moreno gets into trouble, he can use his grappling to alleviate the trouble he's in terms of if he eats a big bomb and he's rocked, he's wobbled, he's hurt, and Figueredo swarms him, Moreno can alleviate the trouble he's in by getting this fight back to the ground. And what we've seen in the 2 fights so far is Figueredo has found it very, very difficult to stuff Moreno's takedowns. And again, like I say, when Moreno has put him on the ground, he's been able to rack up a good amount of top control and hold him down. So all round, this is a very, very difficult fight for Davison Figueredo. And I absolutely love Moreno here. Like, for me personally, a guy that makes my betting decisions based on past performances and footage I watch, this is an absolute dream, because we've already seen these guys fight twice in fairly recent history. One guy's old, one guy's young. Does it take a rocket scientist to work out the older guy's unlikely to be able to improve that much, whereas the younger guy is likely to have improved, a fair bit? This is an absolute dream matchup for a guy like me that bets on MMA for a living. I love Moreno in this fight. I don't care if he loses. This is a bit of a gift. Win or lose, this is a bit of a gift. I think the odds are very generous on Moreno, and if I was capping this fight, I would have him as a much bigger favourite. So I hope you found that useful. And let's get into the main event, the fight that everybody is looking forward to, myself included. Francis Ngannou against Ciryl Gane. What a fight this is. We'll start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, and we can see that Ciryl Gane is currently the favourite at average odds of about 1.67, which is minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. And if we take a look at the odds on Francis Ngannou, he is currently around an average of 2.30, which is going to be plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. So very, very close in the eyes of the bookies to a fight that is 60-40 in favour of Ciryl Gane, which is very interesting because I know Ciryl Gane is the interim champion, but Francis Ngannou is the official champion, I guess. And so I'm quite surprised to see Gane as the favourite in this one. But we've just talked about how the odds were kind of crazy on the Moreno versus Figueredo fight. And so, every week we see discrepancies in the odds and opportunities to capitalise on, inaccurate odds and make some good money. Last week, we had a nice bet on Calvin Kattar to beat Giga Chikadze. The odds on that were absolutely insane. Having Chikadze as a big favourite in that fight was fucking insane. It was madness. And Kattar was, one of the best value bets I've seen in a long time. And so, even on these big cards, you can see big discrepancies in the odds, and based on my research, I do struggle to see why Gane is the favourite in this one. But let me know how you feel in the comments below, and maybe you'll disagree with me. We'll see. So, in terms of the tail of the tape, Ciryl Gane, 31 years old, 6'4" with an 83-inch reach. Francis Ngannou, 35 years old, 6'4" with an 83-inch reach. So both guys virtually identical in terms of size and reach. Ciryl Gane, a little bit younger than Francis Ngannou. Gane is an absolute baby for a heavyweight, so needless to say, Gane should be making huge improvements from fight to fight, and we are kind of seeing that. Every time we see him, he just gets better and better and better. He's making his fights look easier and easier and easier. But Ngannou, at 35 years old, isn't particularly old either for a heavyweight. 35 is very young for a heavyweight. Fighters tend to peak, older at heavyweight in the higher weight classes than they do the lighter weight classes, because obviously at heavyweight it's more about being powerful, whereas in the younger weight, the lighter weight classes, more about speed, reflexes, athleticism. And that's why 34 years old for Davison Figuerado at flyweight is very, very old, but Francis Ngannou, 35 years old for a heavyweight, is actually quite young. When you look at the data behind the different weight classes, age is what age means to fights is very, very. Both these guys, in their prime for heavyweights. I mean, Gane probably not even in his prime yet, still working towards his prime, whereas Ngannou definitely in his prime. So in my opinion, this is one of the greatest heavyweight fights of all time. Very, very high level matchup. There's obviously extra spice in there because both these guys have been training partners before, and there's a bit of beef between Ngannou and his old team. Not too sure if Gane is that involved with that, to be honest. Gane has spoken and said, that's kind of between the owner of the MMA factory and Francis Ngannou. Gane doesn't seem to really get involved in it. But either way, there is additional bad blood, additional spice to this with, both these guys being training partners in the past. Now, with that being said, we do need to talk a little bit about the sparring footage that has been released of Ngannou and Gane's old sparring sessions. And many people will disagree with me on this, and that's fine. But for me personally, the sparring footage that is available between these two means absolutely nothing to me. I think it is absolutely pointless. You could show me sparring footage of Ngannou fighting a fucking dolphin, and to be honest with you, I would probably put more weight on it than, Ngannou's sparring footage of Gane. I know there's a lot of talk about the sparring footage, a lot of people analysing the sparring footage, but I really believe that is a fool's errand, because when you understand how both these guys match up from a stylistic point of view and the keys to victory in this matchup, you'll understand that the sparring footage is completely irrelevant. And the reason why it's irrelevant is because neither guy is going at 100%, right? You've got Cyril Gane, Francis Ngannou stood in front of each other in shin pads, head guards, big boxing gloves, and they're just touching each other, right? They're just chipping away at each other. And for sure, I absolutely 100% agree with you, Cyril Gane is getting the better of that sparring session. But that's Cyril Gane's style, right? You look at Cyril Gane's style of fighting, he's a volume striker. He wants to stand in front of you, use his superior striking defense and ability to read his opponents to just chip away at you. Touches you with leg kicks, jabs, body kicks. Touch, chips away at you, right? No heavyweight in the world is going to be able to outstrike Cyril Gane in a sparring session. It's not happening. He throws an insanely high volume of strikes. But that's not Francis Ngannou's game. Francis Ngannou's game is to load up on big singular power strikes, land that nuclear bomb to the chin and put you away, which he's not going to be able to do in sparring. If Francis Ngannou sparred like he fought, there would literally be no heavyweights left alive in the world to spar with. He would have killed them all at some point in training. So the sparring footage is completely irrelevant, because Cyril Gane in that sparring session is able to spar how he fights, where he stood right in front of Francis and he's touching him with jabs and touching him with leg kicks, and he's outstriking Ngannou by a wide margin. It looks like Ngannou is struggling, but Ngannou's not able to load up on that big nuclear bomb of a right hand and throw it with full power to get the respect of Gane in there to stop him throwing that volume. And I think that's the detail that people are missing. The sparring footage is completely irrelevant, and I would urge you not to put any weight on it, because it means absolutely nothing. Now, if Francis was, fighting, or if Francis was allowed to spar how he fights, where he's allowed to let that right hand go as powerfully and as violently as he wants to, that sparring footage is just as good as the two fights we've already got of Davison, Figuerado and Brandon Moreno to watch. But that's not the case. So it's very difficult to form opinions on how this fight is likely to play out based on sparring footage. We've got to get that out of the way. I would really question anyone that is putting a lot of weight on that sparring footage. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. And in some ways, where we've kind of spoken about that sparring footage, we've already kind of broken down how both these guys match up from a stylistic point of view, right? Because Cyril Gane is one of these guys that is able to throw a very, very high volume of strikes for 25 minutes and a very, very diverse range of strikes. He looks to overwhelm his opponents with attacks. He doesn't really have too much power in his hands. He's not a particularly scary, dangerous striker. But Cyril Gane's biggest strength is that he's got an amazing gas tank and the ability to force his opponents to work very, very hard in a weight class where notoriously fighters can't work very, very hard. Because if you think about heavyweights, they do tend to slow down a lot as fights wear on. So Cyril Gane's strategy is to just put a pace on you that you can't keep up with, and he trusts that eventually, even though he's not going to be able to land that one-shot KO that's going to put you away, he is going to be able to wear you down and break you down with volume to the point where you can't defend yourself anymore. And we kind of saw this in his last fight against Derek Lewis. He didn't manage to finish Rosenstrike or Volkov, but it was the same sort of strategy, right? Where as those fights progressed, it got to the point where Volkov and Rosenstrike just couldn't compete with Gane anymore because, in round 5, he still stood right in front of him, chipping away at him, landing a high volume of strikes, and they're just not able to match that volume. They can't get anywhere near matching that volume. So that's Cyril Gane's style. Francis Ngannou's style is the complete opposite. He's not interested in leg kicks. He's not interested in range-finding strikes. He's not interested in jabs. All he's interested in doing is landing that right hand that is going to send you to the shadow realm. Two completely different styles, and two very, very effective styles, actually, for the heavyweight division, because Francis Ngannou has got one-shot killer KO power that no one in the heavyweight division is going to be able to take if he lands clean and hard. And Gane's strategy is very, very effective because he's got a gas tank and a pace that we've never really seen at heavyweight before. I mean, the closest we could probably compare to Gane was maybe a Cain Velasquez or a Daniel Cormier, but those guys, had a lot of clinch work and grappling as part of their pace, whereas Gane is pure striking, which is super interesting because when DC and Velasquez would grapple, that would take the fight out of a range where they were in danger of being knocked out, right? Because it's very difficult to knock someone out in the clinch or when you're on the ground. Gane is literally standing right in front of some of the scariest dudes in MMA, like Derek Lewis, Alexander Volkov's no picnic. Certainly Jairzinho Rosenstrike's very dangerous, and he's able to do it. He's able to get away with it. Realistically, no one's even come close to hurting this guy. So in that respect, I kind of understand maybe why Gane's the favourite, right? Rosenstrike couldn't get near him, Volkov couldn't get near him, Derek Lewis couldn't get near him. Maybe Ngannou won't be able to get near him either. It's very difficult to say. But we've spoken about how both these guys have excellent strategies and excellent styles for the heavyweight division and why that makes this one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. But what's also very compelling about this fight and what also makes this one of the greatest heavyweight fights of all time is that both these guys have huge weaknesses that the other is very well positioned to exploit, which makes this fascinating because they're both very great at what they do, but they've both got huge weaknesses that the other dude can make them pay for in ways that no one else might have been able to make them pay for ever before. Which, well, I can't say ever before with Francis, but not many guys have been able to make Francis pay for. So let's talk about those weaknesses. So the first one, the most obvious one, is obviously going to be Francis Ngannou's gas tank. We've already said Cyril Gane likes to take control of the centre of the octagon and chip away at his opponents and force them to fight at a pace that they can't compete with. And of course, Francis Ngannou's Achilles heel, the one time we've really seen him struggle badly in the UFC was his, first ever title fight against Stipe Miocic, where he came out the gate super hard, super aggressive, tried to take Miocic out early. It didn't work. Miocic dragged him into deep waters and wore him down with his grappling, right? And Ngannou's gas tank got badly exposed in this fight, which means this could be a very tricky fight for him because Cyril Gane is building a career from putting a pace on guys they can't keep up with and dragging them into the second half of the matchup when they're too tired to defend themselves. Gane's strategy is perfectly set up to exploit that weakness in Ngannou. But what is a little bit tricky about this matchup is that's the only fight that we've ever seen Ngannou gassing. Now, a big part of that is because of how many first round finishes Ngannou has, right? A lot of Ngannou's fights have finished very quickly. But are we being a little bit too harsh on Ngannou by completely writing off his gas tank based on one performance, especially when, he's come out and said that he didn't have the best preparation for that fight. He's learned a lot from that fight and he's made a lot of changes from that fight, right? It's very, very tricky because the only other two times in Ngannou's career, or the only other three times, in Ngannou's career that we've seen him gone past round one, was the Derek Lewis fight, where he was obviously contested at a very, very slow pace. And Ngannou didn't exert barely any energy in that fight, and therefore he didn't gas out because he didn't really do anything. But then the other 2 times we've seen him go past round 1 were in his first 2 fights in the UFC against Curtis Blades and against Luis Henrique. And you know what? His gas tank looked pretty good in those fights. It was all right. There was nothing wrong with it, really. Sure, he slowed down a bit, but nothing compared to what we saw from him, in the Stipe Miocic fight. And we've got to remember now, these fights were 6 or 7 years ago. The fight against Stipe where he gassed bad was 4 years ago. A lot can change in, 4, 5, 6 years. And so, people are assuming that Gane's going to be able to kind of chip away at Ngannou and wear him down. But they're forming that opinion based on one fight that took place a really long time ago. And since then, not only have we seen Ngannou improve a lot, but we haven't really seen, any signs that his gas tank is bad. So it's a very interesting situation because when Ngannou's fresh, he's extremely dangerous, right? He only needs to land 1 shot to put you away. And if Ngannou's able to carry that legit 1-shot KO power deep into the fight, he may not be able to keep up with the volume of Gane, but it means he poses a huge threat to Gane for much longer. So it's an interesting one because we don't know if Ngannou is going to gas out in this fight, and if he does, at what point is that going to come? Is he going to come in round 1 or round 4? Because if Ngannou doesn't start to slow down until round 3 or round 4, perhaps he's got enough gas in the tank to win, rounds 1, 2, and 3 to the point where Gane's going to need a finish in round 4 and 5 to win, which is unlikely because Gane's not really a finisher, and we've seen for all of Ngannou's weaknesses, he's pretty fucking tough. He managed to survive 5 rounds with Miocic and suffered an enormous amount of damage against Miocic when he was very, very tired. So it's not going to be easy to put Ngannou away. And we know Gane is not really a finisher. So it's an interesting one, right? It's a very, very interesting one. And Ngannou's definitely got some question marks over his gas tank, but it's not totally conclusive. It's not like Rodolfo Vieira, where we've got a lot of evidence of him gassing. And Ngannou's a little bit like, no, maybe, he will gas, but at what point? We don't know. We don't know. Okay, so that's Francis Ngannou's weakness. What weakness has Ciryl Gane got, right? Because, he hasn't really shown us very many weaknesses, right? He's undefeated. He's 10-0. He's looked phenomenal in all his fights. He's getting better and better and better. Chris, you keep mentioning this weakness in Gane. What the fuck are you talking about? We haven't seen any weaknesses. Well, this is where fight research is very, very important, because if you go back and watch Ciryl Gane's fights, there is one very clear and obvious weakness that he has that no one has been able to exploit up until this point in his career, but Francis could be the man to do it. If you go back and watch Ciryl Gane's performances against JDS and Alexander Volkov in particular, you will notice that his striking defense is very, very good when he stood right in front of his opponents, right? When he's in the middle of the octagon, his opponent's on the outside and he's chipping away at them, he's very, very difficult to hit. He's very elusive. He's got his hands down low, his chin up high, but he's very good at using his high-level striking to read his opponent's slip shots, get out of the way. Bish, bash, bosh, very difficult to hit. However, when you put this guy on the back foot, he becomes very easy to hit, which is very interesting because no one's been able to put him on the back foot for long enough to make him pay for that. If you go and watch Gane's past fights, take a look at how Ciryl Gane's boxing defense looks when guys come forward and attack him. Because what Ciryl Gane likes to do, what Ciryl Gane's very good at, is he takes control of the centre of the octagon, puts his opponents on the back foot, and then when they come forward and attack him, he uses his length to take, a couple steps back, slip the shot, and then when they, retreat because they weren't able to land because he's so elusive, he gets right back on top of them and continues that pressure. That is the basic pattern that you'll see play out throughout all of Ciryl Gane's fights. But occasionally, guys will follow through. So when Gane's got the centre of the octagon, what you'll usually see is someone will attack him, he'll slip the shot, they'll retreat, He'll go right back to taking control of the centre of the octagon, chipping away at him. Occasionally, what you'll see happen is the guy will come forward and attack Gane. He will slip back to defend the shot, but then they'll follow through and come after him. When they do that, he's extremely hittable, to the point where his hands are down low, his chin is up high, he's not really reacting to what his opponent is doing, and at times he just kind of flails his arms around and looks very, very vulnerable. This is a huge issue against Francis Ngannou, because one of the things that makes Francis Ngannou so dangerous is that he is willing to put himself in a lot of danger to knock you out. Ciryl Gane is one of these guys that covers distance extremely quickly and fully commits. When this guy goes, he fucking goes, man. He will cover distance very quickly, and he will throw everything that he's got into his power strikes. He's also very accurate when he lets his hands go. And so this is the danger for Gane, because Gane is used to playing this, really technical kickboxing game where he chips away at you, and when you come forward, he'll back up and be able to circle away and use his length very well and his ability to read you very well. But he hasn't fought a guy that's willing to follow through. He hasn't fought a guy that wants to be the aggressor. He hasn't fought a guy that is willing to sustain pressure. He hasn't fought a guy that is willing to put themselves in danger to take him out. When you look at all of Ciryl Gane's past opponents, he's been able to put them into a defensive shell pretty early and overwhelm them with his pace and volume. But this might be the first time we see Gane fight someone who's like, nope, ain't playing that game. I'm going to punch you really hard in the face, and I'm going to keep coming forward until I punch you really hard in the face. That's what makes this fight so compelling and so interesting. I think Gane's boxing defense is a little bit sketchy, but he hasn't fought someone that is able to take the fight to him and potentially make him pay. So this is a fascinating fight, guys. I can't wait. If you can't tell, I'm excited for this one. I don't know what's going to happen. One of the greatest tools we've got as gamblers, one of the ways in which we can make money from betting, one of the advantages that we've got over the betting sites is that we can choose to pick our battles. We can choose when to bet and when not to bet. And this is not the kind of fight that I want to bet. When you've got two guys in that even money odds range, which give you, roughly the same risk to reward ratio, right? Both roughly, not too far away from that 50-50 implied probability. Generally speaking, you don't want any big risk factors on either side that the other could exploit. That's not the case here. We know Francis Ngannou's gas tank is potentially sketchy. We know Ciryl Gane can make him pay for that. We know Francis Ngannou is likely not going to be able to match the pace that Gane is going to set. So we've got big risk factors with Francis that Gane is very well positioned to exploit. Which means it's not smart to bet Ngannou as a slight underdog, because you're not getting a great risk to reward ratio, right? If Gane can exploit Ngannou's weakness, the bet will lose, and you're only roughly getting a 1-to-1 risk to reward ratio for the money that you're putting up. But then when you look at Ciryl Gane, I mean, he's giving you an even worse risk to reward ratios. If you bet $100 on Gane, you're not even getting $100 back, right? You're getting like $67 back. At least if you were to bet Francis, you're getting a slightly better risk to reward ratio. Not a great one, but a slightly better one. And so it's a very dangerous fight to bet, because the risk to reward ratio on either guy isn't good. And both guys have got big weaknesses that the other can exploit, because we've never seen someone that could potentially not respect Gane and not go into a defensive shell and not play Gane's game. Gane is only good when he's allowed to control the centre of the octagon and dictate the pace of the fight. Soon as you pressure this guy defensively, it goes out the window for him. Chin up high, hands down low. And Ngannou's the kind of guy that will take the fight to Gane, turn this into a brawl, turn this into a dogfight. And we don't have any evidence that Gane is going to be able to perform well, in that kind of chaos. We do know that Ngannou can kill you dead in that chaos. And so for that reason, Gane's kind of got to fight a perfect fight, while Ngannou's got the power in his hands to put him away. And we don't know for how long Ngannou is going to have the power in his hands to put him away, because all we can do is make a judgment on Gane's gas tank on the Stipe Miocic fight. That was fucking 4 years ago. A lot has changed. So, this isn't a fight that I want to bet, but it's a fascinating fight, and I really hope that you found the information in this video useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Check out my website, mmabettingtips.com. I'm in there every day in the VIP chat room talking to people, live betting football every day. You can watch all my fight research live streams as well for these fights on Twitch. Link for that in the description below as well. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the fights this weekend. I really hope you make some money this weekend. And again, have a great weekend. Love you guys. I'll see you very, very soon. Take care. Bye.